I was only 5 steps from the kitchen when I heard it. His voice came through the half-closed hallway door, soft but heavy, like wet wool on the line. "She's a burden, not family." My breath stopped. The cup in my hand didn't spill, though. I half expected it to. The tea stayed warm against my palm, but my fingers felt ice cold, as if the blood had drained from them all at once. I didn't move. Couldn't. I just stood there, halfway between the comfort of the living room and the dim hallway where light slanted through the curtains like long shadows reaching for truth. Earl Grey lingered in the air, mingled with the scent of lemon polish. I'd wiped across the baseboards that morning. I stared ahead, unsure if I should pretend I didn't hear. But you can't unhear something like that. Not when it's your child's voice. Not when it's about you. The silence afterwards stretched, wider than the doorway, thicker than the air. His voice wasn't angry. That would have been easier, maybe. But this was quiet, almost gentle, like something he'd rehearsed. "She's a burden, not family." It slid through the door and straight into me, not a punch, not a slap, a blade. My hand trembled. The teacup rattled in the saucer. I looked down, afraid I'd drop it, but somehow it stayed in place, like my breath, like my body, frozen between moments. If I didn't move, maybe it wouldn't be true. If I just stayed still long enough, maybe the words would slide back out and vanish. My slipper caught the edge of the hallway rug. The same rug I'd bought when he was 10, back when he ran barefoot through this house, marbles in one pocket and jelly on his chin. It scraped my foot just enough to make me stumble. I reached out, steadying myself on the wall. The wallpaper felt cool beneath my fingers, almost damp. Or maybe that was me, damp from the inside, cracked open in some silent way. The rug didn't trip me. His words did, and I felt it in my spine, the slow bend of heartbreak, the kind that doesn't scream. It leans, sighs, gives way. There was a time that voice called me Mama, with peanut butter fingers and wild stories tumbling from his lips. Now it sounded like a stranger, firm, distant, as if he'd erased the parts of me that once comforted him through every scraped knee and sleepless night. He spoke with the finality of a man who had made up his mind. I wanted to say his name, just whisper it even. But I couldn't move past the lump in my throat. Something inside me held me back, hold me still, like heartbreak had taken my voice hostage. I looked down at my cup again. The tea had gone a little darker now, cooling. In slow spirals beneath the porcelain lid, I'd steeped it just right, added a touch of rose. The scent still clung softly in the air, but I couldn't taste any of it. Couldn't feel the warmth anymore. It was still in my hand, but I was somewhere else, farther than I thought I could go without moving. That's the moment something broke. Not loud, just a soft crack, like wallpaper peeling behind a dresser. Quiet. Private. But once it begins, it never quite stops. I used to scrub that kitchen floor every Saturday morning until my knees ached and the scent of lemon polish filled the house like sunlight. It wasn't about dirt. Not really. It was about the way the tiles caught the light when they were clean, like a fresh page waiting for a story. I'd hum while I worked. Sometimes an old hymn, sometimes something silly Peter used to sing in the tub. Spring air drifted through the open window, curling around my ankles. The birds outside didn't care if the world was spotless, but I did. I believed that if our home gleamed, if the air smelled of lemon and bread and belonging, then everything else would follow. That joy would have no reason to leave. Even now, I can still feel that floor under my bare feet, cool, firm, forgiving. And I remember how proud I was when Peter learned to crawl across it, chubby hands slapping each tile like it was a finish line. Peter used to race barefoot through the hallway like a streak of sunshine on hardwood. His laughter bounced between the walls, bright and sudden, impossible not to follow. He'd dart past the kitchen door, curls flying, and I'd only catch glimpses, just enough to know he was real and mine. Sometimes he'd yell, "Mama, look!" even when I already was. There was a rhythm to those days, the creak of the stairs, the clatter of spoons, the warmth of cornbread baking in the oven. But it was his laughter that made the house feel alive. I used to whisper little prayers when he'd fall into my lap, breathless and happy. Please let him always find his way back to this feeling. That hallway held more than footsteps. It held the sound of a boy becoming someone, and me holding on to every moment I could. My husband's leather chair wasn't fancy, but it held our evenings like a secret. He'd settle into it after dinner, newspaper folded just so, and I'd stretch my legs across his lap like it was our private routine. We didn't always talk. Sometimes the only sound was the rustle of paper or the creak of the cushion as he shifted. But silence with him never felt empty. It felt chosen. I can still smell his cologne in that space, something musky and clean. It lingered even after he'd gone to bed, like a promise not to drift too far. I'd sit beside him with my knitting, my tea, my thoughts. And though we were two people in one room, I always felt wrapped in something bigger than conversation. That chair wasn't just leather and wood. It was comfortable. It was a presence. And even now, when I pass by where it used to be, I swear I can still feel the warmth of his knees beneath mine. One year we didn't have much. Just a cake from a box, a few balloons left over from a neighbor's party, and a single strand of streamers that kept falling off the wall. It rained all day. Not a quiet mist, but a hard, steady downpour that made the roof hum like an old lullaby. Peter didn't mind. He bounced in his seat as we sang to him, his cheeks flushed pink from the kitchen light and the excitement of candles he couldn't wait to blow out. I remember the scent of wet grass drifting in through the screen door, mixing with chocolate and sugar. We cut the cake with laughter instead of knives, eating it in big, messy bites. He looked up at us then and said, "Best birthday ever." And somehow, I believed him. My hands used to be busy in ways that felt eternal, holding bottles, turning pages, buttoning tiny shirts that always seemed to shrink overnight. There were always socks to mend. Peter had a knack for wearing holes in them, like he was trying to escape through his toes. These hands wiped tears, tied shoes, clapped for every silly performance, no matter how small. They knew his fever before the thermometer did. They steadied him when he teetered and let go when he didn't need them to, but always waited nearby. I thought motherhood was something you did, but it's not. It's something you become. These hands weren't just tools, they were maps. Every line, every wrinkle, drawn from carrying a world that used to fit in my lap. At night, when the house was quiet and the air still smelled of dinner and dreams, we'd lie in bed and whisper. The covers pulled up to our chins, breath warm, between us. "He'll grow up kind," he'd say. "He'll remember the way we looked at him." We imagined things, birthdays with too many candles, wedding dances, messy grandkids tumbling through our hallways. Back then, the silence after those conversations wasn't empty. It was filled with pictures we hadn't seen yet. I never imagined this. I never imagined a quiet that meant distance, or a hallway without footsteps, or a kitchen without questions. I think sometimes we dream so loud that we forget to notice the moments slipping through the cracks. We made so many plans, and not one of them included being strangers to the boy we raised. I've asked myself how it happened, not just once, 100 times, maybe more. There were no slammed doors, no harsh words, just space, growing quietly, politely, until I realized. I didn't recognize the room I was standing in. He used to cry when I got hurt. Now he sighs when I speak too long. And me? I still make tea the way he likes it. Still fold his shirts with the sleeves tucked in just right. Still ask if he's eaten, even when I know the answer is none of my business anymore. Love doesn't disappear like a firework. It fades like the last ember in the hearth, soft, reluctant, unnoticed, until you realize you're cold. And the strangest thing is, I don't blame him. Not entirely. Maybe the world taught him to value different things. Maybe I loved in a way that taught him to expect me to always be there. But still, I never thought I'd be in the same kitchen waiting for someone to see me again. Let me know when you're ready for the next scene set. I'm here to continue every section with the same emotional weight and cinematic depth. Peter kissed my forehead when I arrived, quick, a little awkward. But warm, the way he used to when he was running late for the school bus and I'd hand him his lunchbox at the door. "Glad you're here, Mom," he said. His smile didn't linger, but it was kind. His wife helped carry my bags. "We put some fresh towels in the guest room," she said, and I nodded, grateful for the gesture. The room smelled like lavender and a fresh coat of paint. The bedspread had little blue flowers on it, almost like the ones I used to sew. I stood by the window for a while, watching a robin on the fence. It was early spring, and the air outside was just beginning to shift, still sharp in the shade, but soft in the sun. Inside, the house was clean. Still, it didn't yet feel like mine, but it felt possible. I breathed in the faint scent of lemon cleaner from the bathroom. That scent always meant new beginnings to me. I told myself this would be a time for healing, that I was here to rest, that I was welcome, and for a little while, I believed it. The kettle had finished whistling, and I had brewed the Earl Grey just the way he always liked it, hot, steeped strong, no sugar. I wrapped both hands around the cup and sat down at the kitchen table. The chair creaked under me, familiar in the way silence sometimes is. Muted sunlight filtered through the blinds. I could hear the faint tick of the wall clock. Somewhere, toast had been made hours ago. The scent still lingered with the bergamot. I watched the steam rise from my tea and thought of how I used to make this for his father. Always the same routine. It was never about the tea. It was the ritual. A gesture that said, "I thought of you." But that morning I didn't drink it. I just sat there, holding the cup while the warmth left it slowly, quietly. Something was changing. I couldn't say what it was. Not yet. But I felt it. Like a draft you don't see, creeping beneath the wallpaper, the kind that makes you reach for a sweater. Or a reason. I wasn't supposed to hear it. I'd woken earlier than usual, and stepped into the hallway, still tying my robe, hair half pinned. I heard his voice before I saw him. "She's a burden, not family." He didn't know I was there. The words landed soft, but sharp, like cold wind slipping through thin pajamas. My chest tightened, not from surprise, but from how easily he said it, how practiced it sounded. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just stood still. The hallway was quiet. A phone buzzed faintly in his hand. Dust floated in the shaft of morning, light breaking through the curtains. To my right was the little wooden shelf we'd bought at a garage sale, chipped like me. A photo of Peter as a toddler sat in a brass frame. I had my arms wrapped around him, both of us laughing, our cheeks pressed together. Now, my cheek stung. He passed by me, still talking, not realizing I was there. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did, and something inside me folded, soundlessly. I walked into the kitchen and sat down, but my eyes stayed on the wall. There they were, 6 framed photos I'd hung when I first arrived. I'd dusted them just last week, Peter's first day of school. His 5th birthday party, his hands sticky with frosting. One where he'd fallen asleep on my lap, his favorite blanket curled beneath his chin. And that Christmas when I'd knit matching scarves for all 3 of us. We were smiling. I was in the center. Now I stared at those faces like they belonged to someone else's story. The house was quiet. Afternoon shadows stretched long across the floor. A fly buzzed lazily against the window pane. It smelled faintly of cinnamon from a candle I'd lit earlier. But even that felt distant. I expected the pictures to speak. To say, "You mattered," but they didn't blink. Didn't move. They only watched while I came undone, as if they too didn't know how to hold me anymore. It felt like someone had taken a warm quilt off me in the dead of winter and folded it neatly, like it was mine to carry out the door. That's what betrayal feels like. Not loud, not messy. It whispers. In the silence after dinner. At the moment, no one asks if you need anything. In the way your name isn't spoken out loud, but only sideways. I stood near the kitchen table, the cup of tea still untouched. The chill from the old window crept along the baseboards. I pulled my cardigan tighter around me. It smelled of fabric softener and faint dust from the drawer where it sat all summer. I wanted someone to ask, "Are you cold?" But no one did. So, I folded the warmth around myself like a question. One I wasn't sure I wanted answered. The dishes were drying in the rack. The kitchen had emptied. The light outside had shifted, purple now, with the first blink of the streetlight across the sidewalk. I stood near the sink, resting my fingertips on the windowsill. That's when I saw her. Me, or the outline of me. In the glass, I could see the kitchen behind me. But mostly, I saw a woman, older, softer, still wearing the cardigan that sagged at the elbows. I stared longer than I meant to. I thought of all the nights I'd stayed up with Peter when he had nightmares. The way I clapped the loudest at his school play, even when he forgot his lines. The way I told him, again and again, "You'll never be alone." Now that reflection looked back like she was waiting to be reminded who she used to be. I didn't look away. I just asked her, silently, gently, "What now?" After that day, something shifted, but not the way most people would expect. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a slammed door. It was quieter than that. Like a crack in china, hairline, invisible, but waiting. I still smiled when Peter entered the room. Still set the table for 3. Still folded the towels like I always had. But I was listening now, closely. I began to notice how long he stayed on his phone. How he never finished a sentence when I asked about his day. How my stories, once cherished, now landed like junk mail. That phone call wasn't the betrayal. It was the reveal. Trust doesn't break like a plate. It loosens like floorboards under old feet. You walk across them the same way, until one day the creak tells you, "This place is no longer yours." So I smiled, but I also began packing pieces of myself inside, just in case I needed to carry them elsewhere. Dinner got quieter every week. At first, there were questions, casual ones. "How was your day, Mom?" Or, "Did you need anything from the store?" But slowly, like the slow melting of candle wax, the warmth thinned. They talked to each other, about bills, errands, new shows, but their words moved around me, never toward me. I sat between them like a vase someone didn't want to move, in case it broke. I folded my napkin neatly in my lap, even when I didn't eat. I chewed slower, not because of age, but because no one was waiting on my answer anymore. Sometimes I nodded along to their conversation just to feel part of something. Other times, I stared at my plate and waited for the moment I was no longer expected to speak. A faint hum from the TV floated in from the other room. The meatloaf was cold. The carrots had turned to mush. But the silence, that was warm in comparison. Familiar, predictable. That's how forgetting begins. Not when someone stops looking at you, but when they stop expecting you to speak. Sometimes, dinner was already over by the time I walked into the kitchen. I'd find a plate on the counter, half covered. If at all, cool to the touch, the gravy dried and curling around the edge like old wallpaper. No note, no call. I'd stare at it for a few minutes. Sometimes I'd sit and eat, mostly out of habit. Other times, I'd scrape it quietly into the bin and wash the plate before anyone saw. I used to cook with joy, with garlic on my fingers, and love folded into every corner of a casserole dish. Now, even hunger had grown quiet inside me. The fridge hummed steadily in the silence. The overhead light buzzed faintly. My chair creaked when I pulled it back, and I winced, more at the sound than the motion. It wasn't the cold food that hurt. It was the way no one noticed whether I ate it or not. I used to knock, lightly, gently, with purpose. "Just checking in," I'd say. "Is the laundry okay?" Or, "Did you need anything from the store?" But each week, I knocked a little softer. My questions shrank. Now I held them in my mouth, warm and waiting, unsure whether they were needs or nuisances. When the bedroom door was closed, I stayed quiet. When I passed by it, I kept walking. I told myself it was respect, but what I really feared was becoming the noise behind someone's sigh. That's what being a burden becomes, learning how to disappear politely. How to tuck your requests behind your teeth and your needs behind your back. The hallway stretched longer than usual. Shadows lined the walls. Their laughter trickled from behind the door, soft, private, out of reach. I stood outside for a moment, holding the mail in one hand and my voice in the other. Then I turned and walked back to my room. It was late. I was on my way to the bathroom when I passed their door. "Her," I heard. Just that one word. Then a pause, then a sigh, then nothing. It's strange how loud a whisper becomes when you already suspect what it means, when you've already made a room inside yourself for what it might say. I stood in the hallway, one hand brushing the wall to steady myself. The light under their door was soft. The air carried a faint trace of lavender from her evening lotion. I waited, not for an explanation, just something. But silence makes a decision long before anyone else does. I stayed there for another moment. Maybe two. Then I turned and walked, slowly back to my room, careful not to make the floorboards creak. It wasn't fear that kept me quiet. It was knowing they were already finished speaking. He was 6. It was a carnival, the kind with colored lights and sticky popcorn smells. One minute he was holding my hand, the next he was gone. I screamed his name through every aisle of booths and rides, every corner of that endless field. I ran, until my lungs burned, until my voice cracked, and then I saw him. Curled near the cotton candy cart, eyes wide with tears, cheeks red from crying. He clung to me like I was the last safe thing in the world. His fingers gripped my skirt, shaking, desperate. That night, I held him until he fell asleep in my arms. I whispered over and over, "You'll never be alone." Now, I lie in bed, the sheets cold beside me. I wonder if he remembers. I wonder if... The boy who once feared losing me has now forgotten how to find me. I wanted him to be gentle, to be kind, and he is. He opens doors. He says thank you. He donates at Christmas. But I never taught him how to carry someone's weight when it wasn't convenient. I raised him soft, but maybe I forgot to show him that love can get heavy, and that it's still worth holding. Maybe I made things too easy, cleaned up too quickly, said yes too often, or maybe time simply took my voice and replaced it with quiet. Love, when done right, teaches. But I wonder now if I only taught him how to be loved, not how to return it. And now that I need carrying, he only knows how to set me down gently. I tried once. It was after dinner. The kitchen was still warm, the light above the counter casting a soft glow over the dishes. "I miss our talks," I said, softly, not looking at him. Peter glanced up, from his phone, half smiling. "You're fine, Mom." He said it like it was a fact. Like fine covered everything I couldn't say. Then he went back to scrolling. The spoon in his mug clinked against the side. That sound filled the space I had hoped to fill with something deeper. I nodded, swallowed the rest of the sentence like it was too big to say out loud. "I'm fine," I echoed, but I didn't believe it. Sometimes, silence isn't peace. It's just the end of trying. The rain started before they did. It tapped at the windows like it had something to say, like it knew what was coming before I did. I sat across from them, watching water streak down the glass while Peter cleared his throat. "It's just for your safety," he said. His eyes didn't land on mine. They moved, first to the window, then to the coffee table, then back to his hands. His wife sat beside him, lips pressed together, her fingers laced too tightly in her lap, like she was trying to look composed while holding something inside. Didn't speak. Not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't know which ones wouldn't break. The lamp beside us cast a weak glow over the carpet, and the room smelled faintly of lavender and something. Tired, like an attic that hadn't been opened in a while. They weren't cruel, they weren't shouting, and somehow that made it worse. I couldn't breathe, not from the idea of being sent away, but because they were doing it kindly. I nodded, not because I agreed, not because I understood, but because I didn't want them to see me crack. That kind of pain. You learn to hold it in your hands like china, carefully, quietly. I folded my hands in my lap, letting my thumbs press into each other until the tremble stilled. Peter looked relieved when I nodded, like I'd made it easier for him, like I'd done the hard part for them both. "Of course," I said. My voice came out smaller than I'd meant it to. I didn't even recognize it. The clock on the wall ticked too loud in the hush. My cup of tea sat on the side table, long gone cold, untouched. Somewhere deep in my chest, something gave way, like glass in a drawer no one opens anymore. Not shattered, just shifted, irretrievably. It felt like they were wrapping me in bubble. Wrap and placing me gently on a shelf marked "not needed." Everything about it was padded. His voice, her smile, their politeness. There were no harsh edges to brace against. That's what made it hard. If they'd yelled, maybe I could have pushed back. But they were soft, careful, like they were handling something fragile they didn't want to see anymore. I wasn't being pushed out. I was being placed, out of reach, but still within sight. For now, I wasn't angry. Not really. I was just erased, slowly, kindly, like a letter that fades in the sun until no one remembers what it said in the first place. The rain kept tapping on the windows, and I kept sitting in the middle of a room that no longer asked me to stay. That night, I lay under the quilt I made before Peter was born. Pale pink and sage green squares stitched together during late nights when I was still full of questions and lullabies. The seams were uneven, but it had held through everything: teething, chicken pox, his first heartbreak. It smelled like old cedar and the fabric softener I still buy out of habit. The room was dim, the hallway light leaking in from under the door. Outside, the rain was steady, familiar, the kind that helps you cry without anyone noticing. I pulled the quilt up to my chin and let the weight of it press me into the mattress, and for the first time in years, I cried. Not the tidy kind you wipe, away with tissues, the kind that spills, warm, helpless, wordless. I didn't wipe my face. I just let the quilt hold me like it used to hold him. I remembered everything. Peter's tiny fingers wrapped around mine during that summer storm. The way he tucked his head into my side when thunder made him jump, the bowl of soup I cooled with my breath the night he ran a fever, the way he used to hum in the bathtub, off-key but fearless, every moment, like waves breaking against the inside of my chest. Had thought they would mean something now, that all those years of soft hands and warm plates and bedtime songs would count for something, would protect me. But love isn't insurance. It doesn't pay out when your heart breaks. It just reminds you that once you had something worth holding, and now it's out of your hands. Lying in the dark, I wondered, if I left tomorrow, would they feel lighter? Would they notice the quiet? Miss the soft shuffle of my slippers down the hall? The smell of oatmeal in the morning? Or would it feel like space had simply returned? I didn't want pity. I wanted to be needed, not in a heavy way, just in the way a light switch is, small, essential, unspoken. But that kind of need doesn't come back once it's gone. Once someone learns to walk around you, they rarely stop. The window was cracked just slightly. A damp breeze slipped in, carrying the scent of rain and something floral, her perfume maybe, lingering. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence between heartbeats, and I asked myself a question I already knew the answer to. Would they notice? Maybe not right away, maybe not at all. The rain had stopped. The kind of quiet that followed felt like it was listening to itself. I was in the kitchen, rinsing out a cup, when I thought I heard it, a knock, soft, unsure, like a question not convinced. It had the right address. I dried my hands and opened the door. She couldn't have been more than 8. Pink cheeks, brown curls sticking to her forehead, tiny fingers holding something in both hands. My scarf, crumpled but clean. "You dropped it," she said. I blinked, took it gently from her hands. It was damp and smelled faintly of grass and something sugary, like she'd been clutching it on the walkover. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, my voice catching on the edge of breath. She nodded like she'd done something important. She had. She smiled like it was the easiest thing in the world. Wide, toothless in the middle, that kind of gap only children and truth can carry well. "You tell the best stories," she said, like she'd just remembered something urgent. Looked at her, surprised. "Do I?" She nodded. "You're like my story, Grandma." The words hit somewhere I hadn't felt in weeks. Not in the place that aches, but the one that used to bloom. I laughed. A real one. Not forced, not polite. Just there. It startled both of us. She giggled. For a moment, the breeze caught the curtain behind me, nudging it open just enough for light to warm the tiles near her feet. "Want to hear a new one sometime?" I asked. She grinned. "I always do." Later, after she left, I sat, down in the old chair by the window. The scarf she'd returned was draped over the arm like it had never left. I touched it absently and realized I was still smiling, not because I meant to, but because my face remembered how. It snuck back, shy, like a guest unsure if it was welcome. Strange, how something so small can feel like sunlight after a long storm. It didn't hurt to smile. What hurt was realizing how long it had been since I had. That afternoon, I pulled out a notebook from the drawer, the one I used to keep recipes in. I turned to a blank page and held a pencil in my hand, not quite ready to write, but almost. I thought of her voice, the trust in it, the way she stood, there on my porch, small and certain, and it hit me. I still had something left to give, stories, comfort, a voice. Not everyone needed it, but someone did, and maybe that was enough. I didn't feel erased anymore. I felt outlined again, like someone was gently sketching me back into the world. Maybe Peter wouldn't come to the table again. Maybe the seat I had saved in my heart for him would stay empty. But I didn't have to keep waiting. Love isn't leftovers. It's not something you scrape onto a smaller plate and hope it's still warm. I could write the rest of this story myself. Soft, if I wanted. Strong, if I needed. Joyful, maybe. The scarf sat folded beside a fresh cup of tea. The window was cracked, golden light spilling in, painting the floor in long strips. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a footnote in someone else's life. It felt like a beginning. Rosa sat beside me on a park bench weeks ago. Her baby was wrapped in a hand-me-down blanket that had probably been passed through a dozen hands before hers. She smelled like fabric softener and peanut butter, like life in motion. I had been telling her a story, one about Peter. His first real scrape, the one where his knee bled and he screamed like the sky was falling. I remembered how I'd rocked him for hours afterward, humming softly while he held a popsicle in one hand and clutched my sleeve with the other. Rosa didn't nod politely. She didn't smile like she was trying to find an exit from the conversation. She just listened, really listened. Her eyes didn't glaze. Her posture didn't tighten. She leaned in slightly, like my words mattered. Like I mattered. I hadn't felt that in years. Her baby shifted, fussed gently, and she soothed him with a rhythm that only mothers seem to know. I watched her and thought, not with envy, but with memory. That was once me. Maybe it still is. When I finished the story, she looked at me and said, "He was lucky to have you." I didn't know what to say. No one had called Peter lucky in a long time. Not in relation to me, at least, and that's when I knew. She saw me, and that was enough. The envelope felt heavier than its contents should allow. It was filled with bills and checks and small slips of hope folded over decades. Birthday cards I never mailed, insurance I'd forgotten to cancel, the savings I'd meant for Peter's children. He never brought them by. Never even asked if I'd crocheted that blanket I promised when he got married. But I still folded laundry with corners. I still wrote recipes in the margins of old cookbooks. I still saved. I thought the day would come when I'd hand him this envelope with proud, trembling hands. He'd say thank you, maybe even cry. I imagined that moment like a reward, a scene that proved I had mattered. Now I was handing it to Rosa. At the bank, I signed the forms. My fingers shook, not with doubt, but with memory. The teller smiled, politely, not asking questions. Rosa stood beside me, her hands wrapped around her child, her eyes wide with something between disbelief and grace. Touched the envelope twice before letting go, not because I wasn't sure, but because I knew exactly what I was doing. Peter stood in the kitchen, arms folded across his chest. The light from the window was harsh in that late afternoon way, bright, but cold. The room smelled like toast that had burned and been ignored. A silence hummed between us. "Where's the money?" he asked. He didn't call me Mom, didn't ask why, didn't even try to soften it. I looked down at the floor. The tile had a crack in it near the baseboard. I'd cleaned that floor a dozen times, probably more. I remembered when he used to sit on that counter, legs swinging, asking if peanut butter could go with everything. Now he stood there like I was someone on the wrong side of a business deal. "With someone who still sees me," I said. It came out steady. He didn't answer, just blinked, as if I'd spoken a different language. Maybe I had. He once clung to my skirt like it was a lifeline. He was 4, no, maybe 5, hiding behind me in the grocery store when he got overwhelmed. His fingers twisted the fabric into knots, and he didn't let go until I knelt down and told him he was safe. I used to braid his hair, back when it curled at the ends and he let me fuss. I remember his giggle when I tickled behind his ears. The way he said, "I want you to sit in the front row," before every school play. I held his hand on the first day of kindergarten, even though he said he didn't need it. But he didn't let go. Somewhere between first steps and financial planning, between scraped knees and college forms, something changed. He stopped seeing me as soft, only as a weight. Now he stands across the room like I'm something to manage, to move, to file. But I remember, and that's what breaks my heart the most. I walked to the drawer slowly. Peter watched me, confused, maybe even annoyed. I opened it and took out the spare keys, the ones I hadn't touched since the day I moved in. I held them gently, like something ceremonial. He tilted his head. "What are you doing?" I walked over and placed them in his palm. "Leaving," I said. He blinked. "Wait, what?" "Not lost," I added. "Just done." He didn't know what to say. Maybe he thought I was bluffing, but I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry. I was simply finished. There's a quiet kind of freedom that comes when you don't have to slam the door. You just walk through it, and this time, I didn't. Look back. The air outside hit my face like a welcome. Cool, crisp, unsure, but mine. I stepped onto the porch with my small suitcase. The house behind me didn't creak, didn't call my name, just stood there like a story I'd already read. The sun was setting. Dusk painted the street in soft blues and quiet shadows. The porch light flickered on behind me. I stood still for a moment, and then I breathed. It didn't feel like goodbye. It felt like space, like something that had once belonged to everyone else, now belonged to me. I didn't know where I'd go. Not yet. But I knew this much. I was no longer waiting for someone to claim me. I had claimed myself, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt light enough to walk forward. Cottage was small, just one bedroom, a squeaky floorboard near the stove, and curtains I hemmed myself while humming old church songs under my breath. But it smelled like the beginning. Cinnamon from the oatmeal I made that morning. Old books stacked by the window, and the soft breeze that curled in through the cracked kitchen window, tugging at the edges of my recipe cards. No one else's moods lived here. No tension. No waiting. Just me. I moved slowly that morning. Not because I was tired, but because nothing rushed me anymore. The kettle whistled gently, like a friend trying not to startle me. Sunlight poured in through the floral curtains, landing in warm strips across the table. Peace doesn't shout here. It hums. Once a week, I walked down to Rosa's apartment with a canvas satchel full of stories, some pulled from old fairy tale books, others made up on the walk over. Her daughter always hears me coming. I don't even have to knock. She flings the door open, curls bouncing, socks slipping on the linoleum. "Story, Grandma!" she yells, running into my arms. The first time she called me that, I nearly cried. Not because I missed Peter, but because I didn't. She sits cross-legged on the rug while I read, sometimes correcting me if I change a detail. Rosa stirs soup in the kitchen, humming along with the rhythm of the words. This isn't the life I planned, but it's full, and it's mine. I no longer wait for someone to ask how I slept. I don't need to be invited anymore. When I see a child dragging a backpack that's too heavy, I stop and lift it for them. When a neighbor coughs too long through the wall, I leave soup at their door. I don't hover. I don't explain. I just give where it fits, where it's wanted. Not out of duty, but because I want to. There's a kind of freedom in loving without needing permission, in letting love spill out of you like tea, poured gently into any cup that needs filling. It's not forced anymore. It's mine to give. For a long time, I begged quietly for a chair at a table that had already moved on. I waited for them to notice. The empty seat, to reach out and pull me back in. But I've learned something. You don't need to sit where you're not fed. Love isn't limited. It's not a pie you cut into scared little slices. It's abundant. It multiplies when given freely. So now I make my own seat, a bench in the park, a blanket tucked beneath me, a storybook in one hand and warm tea in the other. Birds chirp as the light turns gold, the pages rustle, and I read out loud to no one and to everyone all at once. It's enough. I used to think family meant blood, meant photos on the wall, meant shared last names and obligations, but family is quieter than that. Family is who lets you cry and doesn't look away, who remembers how you take your tea, who doesn't rush your silence. It's Rosa wrapping leftovers for me without asking. It's her daughter drawing me with sparkly stickers and calling me ours. It's the absence of apology when I show up, and the fullness of joy when I do. I found my family. not through inheritance, but through presence. And when their arms opened, let them hold me. My tea doesn't grow cold anymore. I sip it while it's hot, while the steam still curls toward the sky, while the flavor still lingers between breath and memory. I no longer let it sit beside me while I wait to be invited into someone's morning. These days, I sit on the porch early. Birds call to one another from the fence. A storybook rests on my lap. I sip. I smile. Not because someone is watching, but because I finally am. Thank you for sitting with me. If you're 50 or older, drop your age and where you're watching from. I'd love to know who's still listening to Grandma's tales. Your presence means more than you know. And don't forget to subscribe, my dear. There's always another story tucked in this old heart. One more memory, one more lesson, one more cup of tea waiting to be shared with you. If my story touched your heart, I kindly ask you to like this video and subscribe. I'll be here every day, sharing more stories just for you. Thank you, my dear.